The repair crew found it while fixing cell block 12. A single word cut deep into the stone wall, fresh cuts that shined in the afternoon light. The cell had been sealed for over 40 years. The word was simple and scary: help. What upset the workers wasn't the message itself. Prisoners had left many such pleas throughout Eastern State's long history. What scared them was the blood still wet under the letters. Human blood, the crime lab said. Blood that should have dried decades ago. This find in 1995 marked just another chapter in the ongoing mystery of Eastern State Prison. For nearly 200 years, this castle-like building in Philadelphia has housed some of America's worst criminals. Today, it stands as one of the most haunted places in the United States. The question isn't whether ghosts walk these falling cell blocks. The question is why they refuse to leave. Eastern State Prison opened its massive wooden doors in 1829. The idea of Philadelphia's Quakers, it showed a new way to deal with criminals. Instead of public hangings and harsh beatings, the prison would fix inmates through lonely thinking. They called it the Pennsylvania system. The building itself was amazing to see. Designed by John Haviland, it spread across 11 acres in what was then outside Philadelphia. 7 cell blocks spread out from a center tower like wheel spokes. Each prisoner lived alone in their own cell. The cells were 8 by 12 feet. A small yard next to each cell gave the only view of sky. The Quakers believed being alone would make inmates sorry for their crimes. That's why they called it a penitentiary. Inmates wore black hoods whenever they left their cells. They knew their guards only by number, never by name. They ate alone, worked alone, and prayed alone. The system was made to break down the criminal mind, then rebuild it through religious thinking. Charles Dickens visited in 1842. He called the experience far worse than any torture of the body. The famous writer saw inmates who had gone crazy from being alone. Some talked to themselves all the time. Others had made up wild stories about their cell walls. A few had stopped talking at all. Even with the criticism, Eastern State became a model for prisons worldwide. Over 300 prisons used the Pennsylvania system. The design influenced jails across Europe, Asia, and South America. Visitors came from around the world to study this new way of fixing criminals. But the truth behind Eastern State's walls was far different from its hopeful goals. Being alone drove many inmates to kill themselves. Others hurt themselves just to feel something beyond the crushing loneliness. The prison hospital treated many mental breakdowns. Guards said that screams echoed through the cell blocks at all hours of the night. By the 1850s, the prison had given up pure isolation. Too many people forced multiple inmates into single cells. Work programs began to fill the prisoners' time. But the damage to Eastern State's name had already been done. So had the damage to the minds of its inmates. The first recorded ghost activity dates to 1872. Guard Samuel Morrison filed an odd incident report that October. He told of finding cell 181 filled with what he called shadow figures. The cell had been empty for 3 months. Its last person was a thief named William Patterson. He had died there. Morrison's report told how the shadows moved on their own. No light source made them move. They seemed to pace back and forth within the cell. They followed the same pattern Patterson had walked during his final weeks of life. The guard watched this happen for nearly an hour. Then the figures just vanished. The prison's chief boss, Benjamin Harrison, said the report was just tired eyes playing tricks. Morrison was moved to day shift duties, but other guards began telling similar stories throughout the 1870s. Shadow figures became common in the older cell blocks. Mary Elizabeth Williams came to Eastern State in 1889. One of the first women inmates, she was found guilty of poisoning her husband with rat poison. The newspapers called her the Black Widow of Germantown. Prison records show she was put in cell 143 in the newly built cell block 5. Williams served 12 years at Eastern State. During her time there, she claimed to talk with the spirits of dead prisoners. She wrote detailed letters to her sister. The letters told of talks with men who had died decades before she arrived. The letters are kept at the Pennsylvania Historical Society. They contain facts about former inmates that Williams should never have known. One letter from 1891 tells of a talk with James Murphy. He was put to death in 1836 for murder. Williams gave correct details about Murphy's crime, his final meal, and his last words. These details were never printed in newspapers. They were only in prison records that Williams couldn't see. Dr. Harold Richardson was the prison doctor. He looked at Williams in 1893. His report said she showed no signs of mental illness or crazy behavior. Richardson wrote that Williams was very clear and rational in all matters except her claimed talks with dead inmates. Williams was let out in 1901. Local newspaper stories tell of a changed woman. She never married again. She spent her remaining years doing charity work with Philadelphia's poor. She died in 1917. But her detailed letters about Eastern State's ghostly people started decades of ghost hunting. The most famous person at Eastern State was Al Capone. The Chicago mob boss arrived in 1929. He was found guilty of carrying a hidden weapon. Even though he was one of America's most feared criminals, Capone got special treatment at Eastern State. His cell had expensive furniture, fancy rugs, and a radio. Cell 181 became Capone's home for 8 months. Prison records show he was a good inmate. He was quiet and did what he was told. But guards said that Capone seemed always upset. He often talked to himself. He claimed that someone named James was bothering him. James is believed to be James Clark. He was one of the victims of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Clark was shot by Capone's men just months before the mob boss went to prison. Guards wrote down many times when Capone would shout at empty corners of his cell. He would beg James to leave him alone. Leo Templeton was a guard who worked cell block 5 during Capone's stay. He kept detailed personal notes about the mob boss's behavior. Templeton's grandson gave these notes to the Eastern State Files in 1987. They show that Capone rarely slept through the night. He often complained about cold spots in his well-heated cell. One entry from March 1930 tells of Capone cowering in the corner of his cell. He claimed that James Clark was standing at the foot of his bed. Templeton noted that the temperature in the cell had dropped a lot. The steam heating system worked fine throughout the rest of the cell block. Capone was let out in March 1930. He never spoke publicly about his time at Eastern State, but family members later said he stayed haunted by nightmares about James Clark for the rest of his life. Eastern State's most brutal time came during the 1940s and 1950s. Too many people had reached crisis levels. Up to 12 inmates shared cells made for one person. Gang fights broke out often. The isolation that had once defined the prison was replaced by a constant fight for survival. Cell Block 15 became known as the Hole. Problem inmates were sent there for long periods of lonely punishment. Unlike the original cells with their small exercise yards, these punishment cells were windowless concrete boxes. Inmates were fed through a slot in the door. They rarely saw sunlight for months at a time. Robert Tank Davis spent 3 years in and out of Cell Block 15 during the early 1950s. He was found guilty of armed robbery. He was thought to be one of the prison's most dangerous inmates. Prison mind doctor Dr. Margaret Foster talked with Davis many times during his multiple stays in lonely punishment. Foster's case notes were found in the prison files in 1984. They show Davis's slow mental breakdown. He began hearing voices in his 3rd month of isolation. By his 6th month, he claimed that past people in his cell were giving him detailed instructions. These were about prison routines he couldn't possibly know. Davis told of talks with an inmate named Arthur Fleming. Fleming had lived in the same cell from 1943 to 1945. Foster checked the prison records. She confirmed that Fleming had indeed been housed in that cell during those years. Davis knew details about Fleming's daily routine. He knew about his relationship with specific guards. He even knew his method of sneaking cigarettes. All of this was correct according to prison papers. What bothered Foster most was Davis's knowledge of Fleming's death. The prison records showed that Fleming had killed himself in 1945. He hung himself with bedsheets tied to the cell's air grate. Davis told of finding Fleming's body in awful detail. He included the position of the makeshift rope and the condition of the cell afterward. These details were only known to the guards who found the body. They were never written in any papers people could see. Foster said Davis should be moved to a mental health facility in 1953. He was let out from Eastern State the following year. Prison records show he never returned to criminal activity. He lived quietly in South Philadelphia until his death in 1978. The prison's decline sped up through the 1960s. Repairs were put off as Pennsylvania struggled with money problems. Cell blocks began showing serious building problems. The heating system failed often during winter months. Rats and bugs became constant problems throughout the facility. Guard Thomas Brennan worked at Eastern State from 1961 until it closed in 1971. His spoken history interview was done by the Philadelphia Historical Commission in 1995. It gives a first-hand account of the prison's final decade. Brennan told of a facility that was falling apart. At the same time, it was being overwhelmed by ghost activity. According to Brennan, footsteps could be heard in empty cell blocks at all hours. Doors would slam shut with no clear cause. Tools would disappear from repair areas. They would show up in random cells days later. The experiences became so common that guards made informal rules for dealing with ghostly encounters. Brennan remembered one incident from 1967. He was doing a routine security check in cell block 4. He heard piano music coming from the common area. The block had been closed for repairs for over a month. No inmates were housed there. When Brennan looked into it, he found an old upright piano playing by itself. The keys were moving, but no one was touching them. The music was a classical piece that Brennan didn't know. He watched for several minutes before the playing stopped suddenly. A check of prison records later showed something interesting. A former inmate named Vincent Romano had been a skilled piano player. This was before his conviction for bank robbery in 1923. Romano had died in cell block 4 during the flu outbreak of 1925. Eastern State closed its doors as an active prison on the 15th of January, 1971. The last inmates were moved to newer facilities throughout Pennsylvania. For the next 20 years, the massive stone building sat empty. It slowly fell apart from neglect and weather damage. During this empty period, local people began telling of unusual activity around the prison walls. Strange lights were seen moving through the empty cell blocks at night. Sounds of shouting and crying echoed from within the walls. Police got many calls about suspicious activity, but officers found no signs of people breaking in or damage. Urban explorers sometimes broke into the empty prison during the 1970s and 1980s. Many felt overwhelming feelings of fear and heaviness. Some claimed to see figures moving in the shadows of empty cells. Others heard voices calling out for help. Some heard pleading for release. Sandra Mitchell was a graduate student at Temple University. She was studying urban decay when she illegally entered Eastern State in 1983. Her research journal was later given to the university's files. It tells of a night-long exploration of the empty facility. Mitchell's entries tell of a building that seemed alive with spiritual energy. In cell block 6, Mitchell said she found a cell where the temperature was at least 20 degrees colder than surrounding areas. The cell showed no signs of building damage that would explain the temperature difference. Mitchell's thermometer readings are written in her journal. They show a steady 45-degree temperature in the cell. Nearby areas were 67 degrees. Mitchell also wrote about finding personal items in cells that had supposedly been cleared when the prison closed. A Bible in cell 89 had the name Thomas Hartwell written in it. It was dated 1952. Prison records confirmed that Hartwell had been an inmate from 1950 to 1954. He had died of heart failure in that exact cell. The most disturbing find in Mitchell's journal concerns cell block 12. She told of finding what looked like fresh scratches in the stone walls. It was as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. The scratches showed no signs of weathering. This was despite the building being empty for over a decade. Mitchell also found evidence that suggested recent human activity in supposedly empty areas, footprints in dust that looked fresh, cigarette butts that weren't weathered, even what appeared to be recently used bedding in some cells. These discoveries suggested that something or someone was still active in the prison during its abandonment. Her most chilling discovery came in the prison hospital. Medical equipment from decades past was arranged on tables as if ready for use. The equipment should have been removed years earlier, but there it was, laid out with surgical precision. Mitchell's photographs of these arrangements later became key evidence in paranormal studies of the site. The student also documented strange temperature fluctuations throughout her exploration. Some areas would be normal room temperature. Then she would step into adjacent spaces that felt like walking into a freezer. Her thermometer recorded drops of up to 30 degrees within a few feet of movement. In 1994, Eastern State reopened as a historic site and museum. The initial repair work showed how badly the building had fallen apart during its empty years, but it also uncovered evidence that the prison's ghost activity had continued during those empty years. Repair supervisor William Hayes wrote down many unexplained incidents during the renovation process. Tools would be moved overnight from where workers had left them. Electrical equipment would break without clear cause. Workers said they felt watched while alone in certain cell blocks. The most important discovery came in cell block 12. During November 1995, workers removing debris found the fresh carving mentioned at the beginning of this account. The word "help" was cut deep into the stone wall of cell 273. The cuts were clean and sharp. They showed none of the weathering expected from decades of exposure. Crime lab analysis confirmed that the carving was recent. It was made within the previous few months. The blood found under the letters tested positive for human DNA, but damage prevented identification of its source. No tools capable of making such precise cuts were found anywhere in the building. Hayes ordered a complete investigation of cell 273's history. Prison records showed that the cell's last official person was Marcus Thompson. He died there in 1969 during a fight with another inmate. But many inmates had lived in the cell during Eastern State's 140 years of operation. Complete records were not available for the earlier decades. The renovation team also found personal belongings hidden throughout various cell blocks. Letters, photographs, and small handmade items were found concealed in walls and floors, most dated from the 1930s through 1960s. But some appeared much older. All showed signs of being recently handled. This was despite being hidden in areas that had been sealed for decades. Workers also reported strange incidents during the restoration process. Hammers would be found balanced on windowsills in impossible positions. Nails would be removed from boards overnight and arranged in perfect geometric patterns. Paint would appear to dry in shapes that resembled human handprints, even in areas where no one had been working. One construction worker, Mike Sullivan, reported finding his lunch moved from his toolbox to a cell table every day for a week. The lunch would be unwrapped and arranged as if someone had been about to eat it, but it was never actually consumed. Sullivan started bringing 2 lunches to see what would happen. Both would be moved and arranged, but neither would be eaten. Eastern State Prison officially opened for public tours in 1996. Almost right away, visitors began telling of ghost encounters. The site now keeps a log of unexplained incidents. It has grown to over 1,200 written reports. The most common experiences involve shadow figures moving through the cell blocks. Visitors often tell of seeing dark shapes that appear to be walking the hallways. The shapes vanish when approached. These sightings happen most often in cell blocks 4, 6, and 12. These are the oldest sections of the prison. Cold spots are another often reported happening. Certain cells stay at temperatures much lower than their surroundings. This happens regardless of weather conditions or heating. Cell 181, where Al Capone was housed, consistently measures 15 to 20 degrees colder than nearby cells. Visitors also report hearing voices in empty areas. These range from whispered conversations to clear shouts for help. The voices seem to come from specific cells, but investigation always reveals empty spaces. Some visitors have reported hearing their own names called by unfamiliar voices. Professional ghost investigation teams have studied Eastern State heavily since 1997. The Atlantic Paranormal Society did a week-long investigation in 2001. They wrote down many instances of electronic voice phenomena. Their recordings captured what appear to be human voices speaking in empty cell blocks. One particularly clear recording from cell block 15 features a male voice saying, "I didn't do nothing wrong." The voice appears on multiple recording devices at the same time. This rules out equipment problems. Voice analysis suggests the speaker had a local accent consistent with Philadelphia in the early 1900s. The most compelling evidence comes from heat imaging studies. Dr. Sarah Harrison from the University of Pennsylvania's Parapsychology Research Department led these studies. Her team wrote down heat signatures that appear to represent human forms moving through empty cells. These thermal oddities show patterns consistent with pacing. This is the repetitive behavior shown by many long-term inmates. Recent developments at Eastern State have made the ghost activity stronger. Construction work begun in 2018 to strengthen the crumbling cell blocks has triggered a big increase in reported incidents. Workers have complained about tools being moved, equipment failing, and feeling watched all the time. Cell Block 2 had to be emptied temporarily in 2019. Multiple workers reported seeing a figure in old-fashioned prison clothing walking the hallways. Security cameras captured unclear images that appear to show a human-shaped shadow, but the quality is too poor for definite identification. The most recent incident happened in 2021 during renovation work in the prison hospital. Workers found what appeared to be medical equipment from the 1940s arranged on a table as if prepared for surgery. The equipment had been removed and stored during the initial repair work in the 1990s. How it appeared in the hospital, arranged in perfect surgical order, remains unexplained. Dr. Michael Rodriguez is Eastern State's current chief historian. He keeps detailed records of all reported ghost activity. His database includes over 1,800 written incidents from visitors, staff, and researchers. Rodriguez notes that the activity appears to be increasing rather than decreasing over time. The most frequent ghosts are described as male figures in dark clothing. This is consistent with prison uniforms from various historical periods. These figures are most often seen in the early morning hours before the site opens to visitors. Security guards have reported encounters during their overnight rounds, but the figures always disappear when approached directly. Cell 394 in Block 6 has become known as the most active location. Visitors report feeling touched by invisible hands. They hear whispered conversations and experience sudden drops in temperature. The cell was lived in by dozens of inmates throughout Eastern State's operational period. This makes it impossible to identify which spirit might be responsible for the activity. Tour guides at Eastern State have their own collection of unexplained experiences. Sarah Martinez has worked as a guide for 8 years. She reports that certain areas of her tours consistently produce strange phenomena. In the barbershop, visitors often smell the scent of shaving cream, even though no such products have been used there in decades. Martinez also notes that photography equipment frequently malfunctions in specific locations. Digital cameras will shut off, batteries will drain rapidly, and memory cards will corrupt. These problems occur most often in cell block 12 and the punishment cells of the Hole. During evening tours, Martinez has observed what she calls responsive activity. When she tells the story of a particular inmate, unexplained sounds often occur in the areas where that person lived. Footsteps echo from empty cells, doors creak open, and cold drafts appear suddenly in still air. The prison's basement areas, not normally open to tours, show the highest levels of paranormal activity according to staff reports. These underground tunnels and storage areas were used for various purposes throughout the prison's history. Many inmates died in these dark, cramped spaces during the harsh winter months of the early 1900s. Maintenance worker Joe Patterson, no relation to the William Patterson mentioned earlier, has worked in these basement areas since 2000. He reports constant, unexplained noises, moving shadows, and equipment failures. Patterson says that certain tunnels feel heavy, with an oppressive atmosphere that makes breathing difficult. In 2019, Patterson discovered what appeared to be fresh graffiti in a basement tunnel that had been sealed since the 1960s. The writing was in pencil and looked recent, but it was in a style of handwriting common in the early 1900s. The message read, "Tell my mother I am sorry," followed by a name that matched a prisoner who died in the basement during a tunnel collapse in 1924. What makes Eastern State's ghost activity unique is its consistency and the credibility of witnesses. Unlike many allegedly haunted locations, the reports come from diverse sources. These include historians, construction workers, security personnel, and casual tourists. The descriptions remain remarkably consistent across decades of documentation. The prison's design may contribute to the phenomena. The radial design creates acoustic properties that could amplify sounds from empty areas. The thick stone walls and isolated cells might preserve residual energy from the intense emotions experienced there. Some researchers suggest that the building itself acts as a storage place for psychic impressions left by its former inhabitants. But the physical evidence is harder to explain. The fresh carvings found during renovation work show this clearly. So does the appearance of hidden personal items that show signs of recent handling. The thermal oddities captured on scientific equipment suggest something beyond acoustic tricks or psychological suggestion. The emotional intensity of Eastern State's history may play a role in its continued haunting. For 142 years, this building contained human suffering on a massive scale. Thousands of people lived and died within these walls, many in conditions of extreme isolation and despair. The weight of all that anguish may have left permanent marks on the physical location. Prison records document over 1,600 deaths at Eastern State. These include suicides, murders, accidents, and deaths from disease. Many inmates died alone in their cells, with no family present and sometimes no one to claim their bodies. The loneliness that defined life at Eastern State may have followed these souls into death. Eastern State Prison continues to operate as a historic site and tourist attraction. The ghost activity has become part of its appeal. It draws investigators and curious visitors from around the world. The site offers special evening tours focused on its ghostly reputation. But these barely scratch the surface of the documented phenomena. The building houses the memories of nearly 75,000 inmates who passed through its walls over 142 years of operation. Some served short sentences and returned to productive lives. Others died within these stone walls, forgotten by the outside world. Many endured years of crushing isolation that broke their minds and spirits. Prison records show detailed accounts of the daily life that created such lasting spiritual impressions. Inmates spent 23 hours a day in cells smaller than most modern bathrooms. They were forbidden to speak to other prisoners. They saw the same four walls day after day, year after year, with only brief glimpses of sky through small windows. The psychological pressure of this existence drove many inmates to desperate measures. Some would injure themselves just to be taken to the hospital, where they might see other human faces. Others developed elaborate fantasy worlds to escape their mental prisons. Many simply broke down completely, spending their final years in states of complete mental collapse. These intense emotional states may have created the spiritual residue that visitors experience today. The desperation, fear, anger, and sadness that filled Eastern State for nearly 150 years may have soaked into the very stones of the building. Each cell became a container for human suffering, preserving those emotions long after the bodies that felt them had turned to dust. The question that haunts Eastern State isn't whether spirits remain trapped within its walls. Too much evidence suggests they do. The real mystery is why they stay. What keeps these restless souls bound to a place of such suffering and despair? Are they seeking justice for forgotten crimes? Are they trying to communicate messages that were silenced by death? Or are they simply unable to escape the psychological prison that held them even more securely than the stone walls? The blood beneath that carved plea for help remains unexplained. Modern crime lab techniques could identify its source if enough genetic material survived. But even knowing who bled there wouldn't answer the deeper questions. How did it get there? Why did someone feel compelled to carve that desperate message? And why does the activity at Eastern State seem to be increasing rather than fading with time? Some researchers believe that ongoing restoration work is stirring up spiritual activity that had been dormant. As workers disturb areas that have been untouched for decades, they may be awakening memories and emotions that had been sleeping in the stone and mortar. Each renovation project seems to bring new discoveries and new mysteries. The personal items found hidden throughout the prison present their own puzzles. Why were these belongings concealed in the first place? How do they show signs of recent handling when they've been sealed away for decades? Are the spirits of their original owners still interacting with these physical reminders of their earthly lives? Eastern State Prison stands as a monument to humanity's capacity for both innovation and cruelty. Its revolutionary design influenced prison reform worldwide, but its reality crushed thousands of human spirits. Those spirits, it seems, refuse to be forgotten. They continue to walk the cell blocks, pace their tiny cells, and call out for help that may never come. The repair work continues, slowly bringing the crumbling structure back from the edge of collapse. But some things can't be repaired. The pain, fear, and desperation that soaked into these stones over nearly 2 centuries remains as fresh as that mysterious blood found beneath a plea carved by unknown hands. As night falls over Philadelphia, the massive stone walls of Eastern State Prison cast long shadows across the city. Within those walls, security guards make their rounds through empty cell blocks. They walk past cells where thousands once lived and died. They listen to the sounds of the old buildings settling, and sometimes they hear something more: footsteps where no one walks, voices where no one speaks, the echo of lives that ended but refused to be silent. If you've ever felt drawn to places where history weighs heavy in the air, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced something unexplained in a location steeped in human suffering? Subscribe for more investigations into the mysteries that refuse to stay buried in the past.